Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. This is Bill Maddox from the University of New Hampshire Social Sector Franchise Initiative here on the campus of UNH in Durham, New Hampshire, USA. And this is Replication and Scaling for Impact. What are the options? Does social franchising have a competitive advantage? Really excited about this webinar, the first webinar in our series. We've been doing these now for 2 years, Social Sector Franchise Initiative webinars. And with this series, we're going to explore a variety of issues and questions about scaling social enterprise, about social franchising, and some of the impacts of our accelerator program here at UNH. There's an urgent need to scale promising social enterprises that can meet vital human needs. But are we making headway in identifying the most effective pathways to scale? What do we know about the various options for scaling social enterprises in terms of their relative abilities to reach significant numbers of customers while holding true to their social mission? Why do many social enterprises fail to scale? And what are the roles of industry facilitators and service providers in enabling scale? We often assume scaling equals replication. What are other routes to scale? I'm really happy to have with us today as our guests 4 experts in social enterprise and social franchising. We're going to start our broadcast today with Emma Cullenbrander. Emma is the director of a new initiative at Practical Action that's coordinating a wide range of distribution models to coordinate learning and looking for economies of scale. We also have Neil Harrison. Neil is the associate director of the Replication initiative at the Miller Center for Social Entrepreneurship at Santa Clara University. In this role, Neil is focused on scaling out business models and technologies by developing sector-specific playbooks to spread best practices, as well as supporting entrepreneurs to design their scaling strategy. Next, we have Julie McBride. Julie is a thought leader in the field of social franchising and was recently named one of the 5 innovative consultants that are changing the world in Inc. magazine. Julie has been a partner with us here at UNH since almost the beginning of our social sector franchise initiative and has more than 20 years of experience in social sector franchising. And finally, we have Dave Cope. Dave is a partner and co-founder of Plave Cope PLC. It's a boutique law firm focused on franchising, licensing, and branded distribution. He has over 25 years of experience with clients in food service, hotels, educational services, entertainment, events, veterinary, staffing, car rental, homeowner services, retail, and other industries. His work involves structuring franchise and license programs, supply chain arrangements, private equity investments in franchising, corporate and commercial transactions, regulatory compliance, antitrust counseling, and cross-border expansion. He's also worked closely with the International Transactions Clinic, at the University of Michigan, and also is affiliated with the International Transactions Clinic at NYU School of Law. And in that area, Dave has worked a lot with social franchises. So we're going to get into it in just a second. I just want to give you a quick rundown of our agenda. Speaking order will be just as I introduce folks. There is on your navigation for the Zoom a little chat box. We're going to take questions throughout the webinar. So essentially after each speaker, I'm going to pause for a minute and see if there's any questions. I'll ask those questions. And if not, I'll actually give our other panelists a chance. If they want to pop a question in, then they will do that. After we've gone through all 4 panelists, then we'll open it up to general questions. So please feel free to type your responses into the chat box, and then I will ask those questions. I might curate the questions a little bit depending on what is coming in, so if there's similar questions, I might combine them. Also, we'll have some quick announcements at the very end, and just so you know that this is going to be kind of a slide light webinar today. We're going to actually use cameras and people's faces, and we're hoping the bandwidth cooperates and that people don't forget that they're on camera and stand up or, scratch their head and fall on the floor or something like that. So please remember that you're on camera. This is actually I think the first webinar I've done fully on camera. So appreciate you bearing with us as we experiment with this technology. So without further ado, I'm really excited. We're going to start with Emma Cullenbrander from the Global Distributors Collective. And Emma, if we could start by you explaining what is the GDC, and can you talk a little bit about your background and why there's a need for the GDC today in the world of innovation?
Sure, thanks, Bill. About 6 years ago, I started a social enterprise called Pollinate Energy. And Pollinate Energy works in India, works in slums in India, and it's a last mile distribution company. So we sell a whole range of socially impactful products, from solar lights to clean cook stoves to water filters to people living in urban slums. And we do that using a network of door-to-door sales agents who provide products on payment plans. So the Global Distributors Collective really began about 1.5 years ago, when I was still at Pollinate Energy, and I was speaking with a number of other last mile distribution companies from around the world, from Nepal and India and Kenya and Tanzania. And we realized that we shared very similar challenges and frustrations. And in particular, we were all reinventing the wheel, developing our own systems and processes that ended up looking exactly the same. And we faced a lack of support from the sector, and that was because a lot of money gets plugged into developing technology, and not a lot of money gets put into thinking about how those technologies are going to deliver to end users. And B, because the development sector is very segmented by theme. So people tend to be either interested in energy or health or water and sanitation, but never sort of holistically in development. And of course, last mile distribution cuts across multiple sectors. Given the identification of that sort of common set of challenges, we saw an opportunity for us to come together and leverage economies of scale and provide better support to the sector. So I moved into Practical Action. Practical Action is an international NGO, and it has a mission to use technology to alleviate poverty, which is obviously very aligned with the mission of last mile distribution companies. And so we undertook a research study to validate the challenges in the sector and figure out partnership-based solutions. And we held consultations with over 100 last mile distribution companies and over 30 sector-wide organizations. And the result is the Global Distributors Collective. And essentially, this is a one-stop shop, a community of practice, and a service provider for the last mile distribution sector. And it's got 3 objectives. So one is to provide support services to distributors that reduce costs and save time and unlock economies of scale. And that will help distributors to do things like procure stock and train staff, select products, and so on. The second objective is to facilitate matchmaking and collaboration and enable the exchange of information to prevent this constant reinventing of the wheel. And the third objective is to act as a collective voice for distributors to help unlock capital in the sector, which is dramatically underfunded, and influence policy so that there's a better enabling environment for last mile distributors to do the great work that they do. So the collective is being incubated within Practical Action right now. We have a whole range of really fantastic implementing and supporting partners, and we're speaking with sort of a range of donor partners to bring this to life. And I'm really excited about it because it really represents a systems thinking approach to what is a really, really big challenge.
That's really exciting. It's and I've worked with Practical Action for years, and it's great that they have the vision to kind of think in this big picture systems way. Talk about the role of industry facilitators and service providers in enabling scale.
Yes. So there is a huge amount of pressure that is put on social enterprises to scale, but there are a lot of barriers that are completely outside the control of those social enterprises. So staying in the last mile distribution sector, think of the challenges that these companies face in working with consumers who have no money to pay for the products that distributors are trying to sell. So is it the responsibility of last mile distribution companies to provide finance as well as to manage the logistics, the procurement, the sales force management, and so on? Is it their responsibility to provide education and change behavior for people who are using dirty cook stoves and switching them to clean cook stoves? Is it their responsibility to ensure adoption and that after 6 months those products are still being used? It's not really their job to address those challenges, but whose job is it? And Systems change is very complicated, and it can only happen with the support of many, many different actors, and that's donors and governments and investors, microfinance institutions, NGOs. But basically this means you have a little bit of a tragedy of the commons problem because no one's directly responsible or accountable, and therefore nothing's done about it. And that means that social enterprises are faced with these huge systemic barriers without tools or expertise to overcome them. And then they're the ones who are blamed when they're not able to overcome those barriers to reach scale. And so this is why service providers and industry facilitators are so important. So service providers allow social enterprises to specialize and to focus on their core business and their true strengths. And they also allow new entrants to leapfrog because they don't have to develop new systems and processes that can be outsourced. So for example, in the off-grid sector, as the market is maturing, what we're seeing is that companies aren't having to come in and do it all themselves. You've got service providers like Angaza, who provide a pay-as-you-go platform for technology that is hardware agnostic, so it can be used for multiple different technologies and with multiple different manufacturers. You're seeing technology providers such as Renew-It come in. You're seeing customized CRM software like Envision, which are tailored for last mile distribution companies. On the sort of side of industry facilitation, those facilitators are really important for presenting a credible and coherent voice for the sector to share information and influence policy and attract capital and all those kinds of functions. So, for example, it's industry facilitators that played a really critical role in influencing the Kenyan government to remove VAT charges on all imported solar equipment, which was obviously a huge win for those companies working in solar in Kenya. And industry facilitators also do things like matchmake and facilitate collaboration, enabling social enterprises to find strategic partnerships and develop opportunities. And this role is particularly important for those small local social enterprises who don't have the same networks and access to capital as Western entrepreneurs. And it's done through, those big global events like SOCAP and SCOL, but actually the most important stuff happens locally because that's where the relevant partnership opportunities are. So in summary, if we want social enterprises to reach scale, we can't expect them to do everything, and we can't keep plugging capital into the social enterprises themselves. We have to look at the broader ecosystem and support those efforts to work alongside those social enterprises to overcome those external scaling barriers.
That's great. And in our discussions of it, you had made the point that there are many different routes to scale, and we need to move away from this idea that scale equals replication. Can you explain what you mean and give some examples of scale that is not replication?
Yes. So too often, scale is seen as being the same thing as replication, and that means either growing your organization, either growing your existing team or moving into new regions and setting up new branches, or it's seen as franchising. And that's certainly one approach to scale, but there are other routes to scale. So I wanted to present a couple of examples of other sort of routes to scale. So one is around influencing and advocacy and market activation. And I think Sunny Money is a really good example of this. And actually all my examples are going to be in the energy space because that's my background. So apologies. So Sunny Money sells solar lanterns across Africa. And they were one of the first entrants in Tanzania. When they entered the market in 2009, about 40,000 solar lanterns had been sold. By 2014, 8 million lanterns had been sold, and nearly 1 million of those were sold by Sunny Money. So, success. But what happened is when Sunny Money entered the market, lots of competitors then started to enter the market, and there were also problems that emerged like counterfeit lights and imitation products, which caused a lot of distrust in the market. So Sunny Money switched strategy, and instead of building out their distribution business, they decided to focus on working with the industry to advocate for better standards, better enforcement procedures, and increase awareness about investing in poor quality alternatives. So they ended up exiting Tanzania, but they heralded it as being a real success because they were able to catalyze the market. They were able to prove that in Tanzania there was demand and there was willingness and ability to pay, and they learned a huge amount about how to build distribution models in new markets. And so today this type of market activation work and advocacy is really critical to their strategy. So another example of a route to scale is through partnerships, and that can be through mergers or acquisitions or just sort of general strategic partnerships. So an example I want to give is the partnership that's just recently been announced between Mobisol and Rafiki, also in Tanzania. So Rafiki is a mini-grid developer, and so they build these mini-grids that serve local communities and connect up to 1,000 households. And Mobisol sells solar home systems, so they are standalone household solar solutions. So under this new partnership, Rafiki is going to continue to build mini-grids, and Mobisol will basically complement this offer by selling customers on the perimeter of the mini-grid solar home systems. So jointly, they're in a position to give a much broader range of customers access to energy and access to energy appliances. So within the mini-grid, customers can access equipment like water pumps and mills and carpenter shops and so on. And then on the perimeter of the community, through the solar home systems, customers can use things like mobile phone chargers and barbershop and so on. So they are leveraging economies of scale by sharing a lot of the logistics and operations, but they're improving the value proposition for customers, and they're allowing for broader rural development. So it's a very mutually beneficial partnership, and it's allowed them to reach customer segments that they would otherwise never have been able to reach.
That's great.
So then, am I able to give one more example, or am I running out of time?
I'm running out of time, but quick, you can do it. By all means, go ahead.
Okay, I'll be really quick. So my last example of a route to scale is through specialization. And the example there is of Solaris Off-Grid, which started off as a solar distributor, developed a really awesome software solution that is hardware agnostic and provides CRM and pay-as-you-go services. And they soon realized that that software solution could be used by a whole lot of companies other than their own company, and they decided that that's what they were going to scale. So they weren't going to scale their distribution business, but they were going to focus on scaling up their software platform. And I think what these examples highlight in summary is that we have to move away from this very narrow concept of scale, and that really the route to scale depends on A, what is the goal for scaling? Why do you want to scale? And then B, what is it that you want to scale? What is the core of the innovation that you want to scale, and what is really essential? And I think if you can answer those questions, then you can figure out what is the right route to scaling, and that may or may not be replication.
Well, and I think the bottom line that I'm hearing, Emma, is that social entrepreneurs really need to think in a bigger way. They think not only about their own businesses and all the many things that their social enterprise needs to focus on, but they really have to look at how the market is affected or constraints in the markets, and really thinking, as you started out with, the kind of systems view of how all things are connected, and if they have a clear view of where they are within that system, then they can think about how to affect that system, partnerships and things like that. So thank you so much, Emma. Really exciting. We had one question, I think that was covered. Marla Rosner, who is from the Social Sector Task Force, wanted to know about an example of technology facilitating last mile distribution. So you had mentioned some particular tools. Can you give an example of maybe those particular tools and how they work to facilitate last mile distribution?
Sure. Well, in terms of, so you're obviously not talking about the technologies being distributed, but the technologies facilitating that distribution. And those technologies are mostly related to software. So obviously it's important for last mile distribution companies to have software to enable them to manage their customers and their inventory. And if they're using pay-as-you-go technology, there needs to be a software solution to manage that technology as well. I think another really exciting platform that a lot of distributors are starting to use is the platform What 3 Words, which is essentially an app that enables you to track and locate a remote off-grid customer base. So when you're working in slums, for example, where people don't have fixed addresses, it's very hard to find those customers. And so if you have an app that enables you to locate those customers and follow up on their repayments and provide after-sales service, that's extremely useful. So those are a couple of examples.
Great. I imagine part of what the GDC is going to do is maybe have a place where people can find out about these tools and be able to access some of this information. So
exactly.
We'll be happy to continue spreading the word about the GDC as you start to take shape and move forward with the initiative. So thank you so much, Emma.
Great.
So now we're going to talk to Neil Harrison. Neil and the work that the Miller Center has done have really done a terrific job with hundreds and hundreds of social entrepreneurs over the years. And so Neil has been in this terrific catbird seat of being able to see all kinds of kind of permutations of social enterprise, and decided to take on the whole question of replication as a kind of a central role that Miller is doing, along with the other things that happen in the center. So I'm really glad to have you here, Neil. And over the past 10 years, you've actually shepherded more than 800 social enterprises, which is really amazing. So congratulations for that. How many GSBI alumni reach scale, and why is it so difficult for social enterprises to scale up?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Yeah, so it's over the past 15 years, we've been working with social entrepreneurs around the world, and have trained and served about 850, close to 900 at this point. Looking at the most recent data of our alumni, I'd say about 10 to 15% of those actually reach kind of what we would consider scale, raising large amounts of money and impacting lots of lives, and kind of expanding their business to new geographies. So why is that difficult? So we see a bunch of different reasons for this. Emma just talked about a lot around the ecosystem and kind of different ways of scaling. I'll kind of touch on specifically around the entrepreneurs themselves. So firstly, I'd say, is the business model kind of ready for scale? Is it providing enough value to the customers? Is the business model sound? Does it work without constant tinkering, and exhibits the economies of scale? So a lot of the entrepreneurs are kind of still working in difficult situations and environments, and constantly improving their business model. Secondly, I'd say, the teams and leadership is also kind of a barrier of scale. Scale requires kind of new skill sets, and a lot of times the teams just aren't necessarily prepared for that. And then lastly, kind of going back to the ecosystem question, access to capital is a barrier. So there's a great scarcity of capital in the kind of upwards of $2 million in this space, and a lot of times entrepreneurs will have to go after different forms of capital. So for example, they might be looking at commercial rates of return on equity, and not so much on the grant funding that they use to kind of lift themselves as a startup. So I'd say those are the kind of main barriers of scale. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Neil. You see franchising as a promising model with a possible advantage over other types of replication, but with this caveat that franchising is less adaptable to the dynamics of change. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so an analogy that we use is around cooking. So when you're scaling, you're kind of like cooking up your a recipe, and there's two different types of recipes. One is taking the original model and kind of replicating it around. So I'd say this is kind of more of a franchise approach. And in the cooking kind of analogy, we call it the McDonald's French fries. So you're taking McDonald's French fries look the same everywhere in the world. You're kind of going through the whole kind of supply chain and processing, and just looking at your operating model and moving it around to different places. The other kind of second approach you could use is more like chicken soup. So there's two basic ingredients to chicken soup: chicken and water. But everywhere in the world, chicken soup is different. So some countries use different spices and different ingredients to make the soup. So in different countries, you have to be dynamic and adaptable. And I'd say franchising can really work around, a lot around what franchising does is about brand equity. So if you have a great brand and you're really just trying to move your operations, it can work well. But some of the problems is that if you're moving across continents and so forth, you really need to form partnerships and adapt the business model. So I can give an example. One of our alumni, Hippocampus India, does early childhood education in India. And while they started in one state in India, they wanted to grow to different states in India, and then also look at moving to different geographies altogether. Even in a different state in India, it can be like a different country. So they've had to adapt their model to fit that. And so they've used several different approaches to scale. So they've used partnerships and new leadership teams to open up new branches in India. They scale through not only doing a B2C model, but also using a B2B model where they're using their curriculum and their technology to go to private schools. So it's a kind of a completely different model. And then they had an opportunity through a partnership to actually go into Mexico. And so when they did that, the model completely changed because Mexico's school early childhood education needs were different than in India. So the model that the entrepreneurs and the team in Mexico's used looks very different. It's a B2B model, and they just license out the technology and the curriculum of the parent Hippocampus India.
So it sounds like, from a franchise, a creator of a franchise model, you have to have that kind of ability to give up some of the kind of original concept in order to make it replicable in a completely different environment where conditions are not the same, where there's a kind of a challenging environment that you wouldn't have had the first place you replicate or first place you created the enterprise. I think that makes the whole idea of scaling from country to country more challenging. We have worked with GSBI, which I know you work with them as well, and they've had this issue moving from country to country in Africa. I guess would be some kind of more or less answered my original question, but is there kind of advice you would recommend in terms of social entrepreneurs that are looking at replication in terms of what are the things they need to think about keeping that are core, and what are the things they can kind of give up in terms of adapting the model to new locations and new business circumstances?
Yeah, so the approach that we use is, first you have to understand if you're ready to replicate. So answering those kind of core questions around your business model, and so is it providing value? Is it sound? Are you tinkering it? And then also, how are you acquiring customers? Do you know how to reach the first users? And is your ability to acquire customers quickly at a cost lower than the revenue that you generate, right? So that's a key transition point. So that's just kind of getting your business model, kind of sound. Secondly, select the territories that you're going into. So what's the territory fit? So if you're going into a new country, you need to think about, why are you going into that country? Are the customers the same? Are the problems the same? What's going to have to be adapted? Do you have great partners, there in country that you can kind of test things? And then after kind of you thinking about that, then the question is that, going back to that recipe analogy, what has to change and what has to stay the same? and how do you kind of mix that up? And when you're going through that, you can decide, well, everything's pretty much the same here. I can do franchise, right? I can franchise. One other quick example, another entrepreneur I've worked with is a company creating biomass pellet machinery using agricultural waste to sell institutional sized cook stoves, right? And they're in India, and they have a great product, and they're selling well in India. They wanted to franchise outside of India, so creating a franchise model. And I've been working with a young entrepreneur in Kenya that wants to take the technology and use it in Kenya and kind of build it up. The challenge is that the original business wants to keep it a franchise, right? So once that the whole process of keep the brand equity, keep the business model pretty much the same. And the entrepreneur in Kenya is like, this is a completely different market. Nobody knows the name of this company. All I want to do is license your technology and figure out how to kind of start it from scratch. So there's kinds of barriers to the scale, and kind of like a Jibu or health store, where they've been able to really focus on the operations and say, look, we have a great operation, and we want to kind of move to different countries using this operations and using the kind of franchise model.
Great. Well, this is a question you kind of more or less answered, but this is actually from Sarah Full, who has written, how can we be adaptable without the constant tinkering you mentioned? It's difficult to scale up. So what's your kind of advice for being, adaptable and flexible?
You have to be adaptable and flexible. It's just kind of the order of it. Figuring out, so what I said before around, okay, my enterprise is ready to scale. I'm, growing great. And I've identified several territories that I want to go into, and I'm forging partnerships. Now, going back, I keep on going back to this recipe analogy, because I think it's really important. So looking at everything around your business model, your how do you sell the markets? How do you acquire customers? What's your supply chain look like? What are the teams? What's your team look like at scale? What do partnerships look like? Your financing mechanisms, et cetera. And saying, like, these are the things that I completely can't change when I'm going to a new place, and these are the things that I can change. And by doing that, you can simultaneously keep the flexibility, yet be true to what your business is doing.
So it sounds like tinkering is not an option. You have to tinker. You have to be willing to keep trying things and trying to figure out what makes sense for the new context you're in. So just
absolutely,
yeah, part of it. So, well, thank you so much, Neil. I really appreciate your insight and wisdom, and really admire the work that you guys do at the Miller Center. And we'll probably have additional questions for you, so hang out. And now I'm really excited to introduce my colleague and friend, Julie McBride. As I gave in her introduction earlier, Julie has been involved with social franchising as a leader in the field for quite a while, and is taking the exciting step of kind of jumping out from working for other people, deciding to work for herself by starting a new company called Stage 6. So welcome, Julie. I'm really glad that you're here with us today. And based on your experience, work with your new company, Stage 6, in more than 20 years that I've mentioned with social franchising, feel are the advantages of franchising over other replication models, and why is it particularly good for scaling social enterprise?
Well, first of all, I mean, franchising, as you all know, it's just one of many methods of expanding a business. It's not the only method, and it's not the right method for all businesses. And in the commercial sector, actually, most businesses use more than one method of expansion. I am particularly focused on the franchise model because of its ability more than any other model to grow geometrically while at the same time maintaining standards and achieving economies of scale. No other business model is capable of doing that to the extent that the franchise model is doing that. And I think that's why it's used so widely in the commercial sector. And I don't think it's used, there's still a huge amount of unrealized potential for it to be used in the social sector. I think one of its, it has the franchising offers advantages to both, to three different people. One, the business owner looking to scale. Two is entrepreneurs looking for business ownership opportunities. And three are the customers that the franchise businesses will ultimately serve. Business owners, there are a lot of business owners out there, social business owners, local entrepreneurs who own and operate businesses that provide products and services that meet people's, social needs that are also profitable. And these business owners are looking for ways to scale without having to raise the capital and human resources needed to do that. And franchising offers a way for them to leverage other people's money and manpower and market expertise to expand. So I think, that's one of the huge advantages of the model for the business owners that want to scale. The advantage of franchising for people who need a way to earn a living are that, it offers business ownership opportunities or economic opportunities to people who are neither entrepreneurs who want to start their own businesses and take that risk, or people who could be employees but there are no jobs available. So that it provides a way for people in this third sort of segment to earn a living. There are business ownership opportunities. People can buy a franchise and own and operate their own business and have control over their ability to earn an income. And then thirdly, it offers benefits to consumers because it makes it possible for people to get access to products and services that consistently meet a certain standard that they expect to receive and that they need to receive. And when it comes to social services like water, sanitation, or healthcare, deviation from a certain standard can be the difference between life and death. So where, we might not want necessarily a consistency in the food we eat, variety is interesting in food and clothing and things like that. I don't necessarily want a whole lot of variety in the quality of my healthcare or the water I drink. So I think the model is particularly suited to businesses and products that meet a more of a basic social need.
So you described kind of three different beneficiaries of franchising, but you also have talked about a kind of fourth, which is that franchising can drive economic development. And what are specific ways that it can do this? And can you give concrete examples?
Well, in the commercial sector, franchising is a huge driver of economic development. It's been adapted in industries. We always think of franchising in the food industry, but it's been adapted across more than 150 different industries. And there are, more than 5,000 franchise brands around the world. And the franchising creates an estimated 8.5 million jobs globally and is actually responsible for about 25% of private sector jobs in the US alone. So there's plenty of evidence that it drives economic development in the commercial sector, and there's no reason that it can't also do that in for businesses that solve a social need in social sector. And it does that really in a few different ways. One, by creating business ownership opportunities. Again, when we're talking about using the model to expand a business, we're doing it in a way that makes it possible for new people to actually purchase the rights to own and operate their own business. So that creates more wealth generation opportunities and helps to create a middle class. It also creates more jobs because those business owners will then hire people to work at those businesses. And it's doing this in local communities. So you want a new franchise location in a new community, you find a person who can be the franchisee who's from that community. So they lift up the economic. You're helping to drive economic growth in communities because it's people who live in those communities who own and operate those businesses in those communities. And then you're keeping more of the people's money in those communities too. People purchase products and services in those communities. You attract more investment into those communities. So that's one of the ways that the model actually drives economic growth locally.
Right. Great. Thank you. And just one kind of final point is we talked earlier about the kind of some of the challenges with franchising, and Neil used the different analogies of recipes and soup. If we're looking at social franchising as a replication model to bring to other countries, is there a drawback to franchising because of its need to kind of maintain strong brand identity and systems and things like that? What are the kind of challenges, and how do you get around the challenges of being able to have a model that's pretty much a strong product or service that people are used to, but being adapted to change to new markets?
Well, I mean, a couple of things. So first of all, I would argue that franchising is adaptable. It has to be. If a business, it has to work. You have to adapt the business to the market in order for it to succeed. So franchising is adaptable to a certain extent. It's more a matter of who gets to do the adapting, and how much adapting can you do. If it has to be adapted too much, then it just doesn't make sense to franchise there. So again, it's not the answer for all businesses in all locations. So there are elements that can be adapted, but not while compromising standards. So that the thing that must maintain consistency is the standard. That means the standard of the product and service that's being delivered has to be maintained. We can't compromise on standards. What can be adapted are things, I think Neil was alluding to them, are things around sort of the customer experience or the decor or menu items. And you see that in commercial franchising everywhere. If you want to go back to the McDonald's analogy, the core business of McDonald's is the hamburger, and yet they have successful restaurants in India that serve only vegetarian, menu items. So there are ways to adapt, maybe not the French fry itself, but the menu to include other items that might be more culturally appropriate or meet the demands of people in the marketplace. So that's the first thing. One, I do think it is adaptable, or not I think, it is adaptable, maybe not as much as a proprietary business that somebody would own, but it is adaptable. Two, if somebody wants to, if the model needs to be adapted that much, it shouldn't be franchised there. And two, if a business owner wants to have that much of a creative license, they shouldn't be a franchisee. So again, just making sure that it's the right fit. Don't try to fit a a square peg in a round hole or whatever. And what else? I think those are the main points I wanted to make there.
So Latte Lawson Lotego, who's from Oxfam USA, has asked, Julie, how much have you seen as it's contributing to innovation in further adapting the whole franchise model?
I'm sorry, how much is what?
How much have you seen franchisees contributing to innovation, further adapting the whole franchise model? In other words.
Oh yeah, no, that's a good franchisors listen to their franchisees. You know, I mean, that's part of the benefit of being a franchise for the franchisor is they get access to market insights that they otherwise wouldn't have access to. And so, you know, I think a perfect example of this, I mean, I'll just use the McDonald's analogy again, but a perfect example of this in the commercial sector is the story of McDonald's and how, you know, they were founded as a lunch and dinner concept serving hamburgers, and now their biggest seller are breakfast items. And that whole idea of adding breakfast came from a franchisee who really saw this as a market opportunity and proposed it to headquarters, and headquarters gave them the go ahead to try it out, and if it worked, you know, they would give them permission to do it, and they ended up adopting it for the entire, you know, system. So again, the relationship between franchisor and franchisee has to be such that they work together to make sure that the business as a whole succeeds. You know, they want to help each other adapt the business throughout the life of the business to the ongoing, changing, growing needs and desires of the customer. And that comes from this ongoing engagement and discussion between, you know, people in the whole network.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you very much, Julie. We really appreciate you joining the webinar and wish you luck with stage 6.
Thanks.
And now our final guest is Dave Koch. Dave is you're not going to see his face. He's a very handsome guy, but he's going to use slides instead. So Dave, kind of walk us through some of these slides, but let me just kind of start out by saying that you've, you know, had a really wide range of experiences from the Michigan International Transactions Clinic and commercial franchise legal work. Seen many examples of both socially oriented and commercial franchises. I wanted to ask you a question. Have you ever advised a company not to use a franchise to replicate?
Well, thanks, Bill, for that kind introduction. You know, it's interesting. I mean, for us, for the lawyers, usually when the client, whether it's commercial franchise or social enterprise in the clinic, by the time they get to the lawyer, they've usually already talked to the Julie McBrides of the world or the Neil Harrisons of the world, and they've kind of tentatively settled on the model that they want to use, and whether it's franchising or some other model. So it's not really so much the lawyer function to advise them on the business decision about whether to use franchising or not. But having said that, when you talk to clients for the first time, or the students in the clinic interview them for the first time, we do try to get a sense of whether they have gone through that exercise of whether it's the right model. And there can be many reasons that not to use franchising as the model. Well, I'll just mention a few of them, but you know, it could be as simple as the activity on the ground simply does not lend itself to replication through franchising, either because the activity is just too complex to execute on a regular basis, or maybe it's dependent on the individual creative input of a particular person who started the brand who can't be everywhere. It could be that, you know, if you're looking to replicate, and if you what commercial brands usually bring in from franchisees is capital. They bring in capital and local knowledge, and if what you're trying to do isn't dependent on attracting capital from the franchisees or dependent on their local knowledge, you may not want to use franchising as a model. Another factor is to what extent franchisees are making a financial contribution to the expansion. If you start off with a business activity from which you as the owner are generating all of the revenue, and then you try to translate that into a franchising environment, there still has to be enough revenue in there for the franchisee to make money while making their financial contribution to the brand. So if the revenue stream isn't wide enough to accommodate the royalty or whatever other financial contribution is expected from the franchisee, franchising may not work for that brand. And another big factor is just, and this is probably the one that we confront the most often, is whether the organization really has the right mindset to be a franchisor. We always tell clients, in the commercial side, we always tell clients, when they're starting a franchise program, we always say, well, whatever business you've been in up to now, whether it's running food service or running a hotel or a car rental agency or whatever, educational service, whatever it may be, once you start your franchise program, you're now in two businesses. You're in the business that you were in before, plus you're in the franchising business. And with that comes a whole set of expectations that you have to deliver on to franchisees. You're creating these relationships where people expect to be trained and learn how to execute on the model, and you have to be ready to get phone calls and emails, all hours of the night and on weekends. And even though you may have limited your legal obligations in the contract, there are expectations that you will deliver on the brand promise and the relationship. So if the social enterprise or commercial enterprise is not ready for that, franchising is not going to work for them. And finally, another factor is just whether the local legal system really supports franchising. It may be either from a legal perspective, the elements there, the legal structure for intellectual property protection isn't present, or just as a practical matter, there's the court system doesn't work, or there aren't other dispute resolution mechanisms that you can rely on when inevitably issues come up in managing the franchise system. Those are just a few of the reasons you have to consider.
Great. So you have kind of outlined in a few slides some of the principles we should think about in terms of putting together smart franchise design. Do you want to kind of walk us through some of these ideas, building from the ground up, and your concept of respect design?
Yeah. So when we start working with a brand, whether it's a commercial brand or a social enterprise in the clinic, I always tell the students, we can't go in with the sense that we're going to impose a franchise structure on this, or whatever, whether it's a distribution program or an agency or a consignment or a license. You can't walk in and say this is the end result. You have to start from the ground up and really understand what's going on the ground. And I'm not going to go through all these elements on the screen, and there's many more, but just some of the questions you're asked is, what is the end product or service that's being delivered to the end user? And is it delivered through a brick and mortar location? Is it delivered through bicycles or mopeds, or is it delivered through technology, or how does it get to the consumer? So you go through this whole set of factors, and every one of these feeds into a determination of what goes into the rules or the contract terms that are developed between the social enterprise or the commercial brand and the operator or the franchisee. And just to pick one, the supply chain, for example, element is a big one, because if there is a supply chain element where the brand is providing a core input to the franchisee, that's also a very strong control for the brands, because if the franchisee is doing something that could potentially damage the reputation of the social enterprise, you have that control over the supply chain to be able to cut that off. If other types of activities, though, there may not be a product that's being supplied or a technology platform that the franchisees are dependent on, and you don't have that level of control. So you have to try to build it in other ways. So we go through all these questions and many more to try to understand what needs to go into the relationship.
Sure. I forgot to mention, if you want us to move the slide, just let us know.
Yeah, next one.
Yeah.
Go to the next. So
go ahead.
So respect by design is, I stole this phrase from folks in the privacy sector, where they often talk about privacy by design, which simply means, focusing on building something into the program from the beginning. And in this space, in franchising, whether it's commercial or social, I put it in red letters because these programs do not work unless franchisees respect the brand and the brand respects the franchisees. It has to go both ways, and it has to be continuous. So what does it mean? Respecting the franchisee means not treating them like an employee. As Julie mentioned, you are creating business operators and delivering business skills, and it implies that there is some level of autonomy, where people may be hiring their own employees or making their own decisions about local inputs or dealing with local authorities, and you can't simply dictate to them like you might simply give orders to an employee. You have to give them the respect of a business owner. Transparency is critical, so that if you are, we have talked a lot about adaptability and flexibility and being able to make the program work as it goes along and circumstances change. But if you're going to make decisions about changes in the program, whether it's a product or the way the brand is used or technology or a new investment in equipment, the decision-making from the social enterprise side or the commercial brand side has to be transparent to the operators. They have to understand what is the business case, what is the reason for making the change, so that you have to get that buy-in from the operator side. I think Julie also mentioned that it's critical to have communication and acceptance of input from franchise operators. So you have to provide meaningful channels for them to give that input, which may mean some kind of advisory council or regular meetings or some opportunity, even maybe an online platform, or where people can trade ideas and learn from each other's experience. And finally, we've also already talked about acknowledging local conditions, how the way the program has worked in one country may not work the same in another country, and the social enterprise or commercial franchisor has to be ready for making those adjustments going from country to country. You can go to the next. So on the other side, from the franchisee perspective, the respect of the brand means simple things like, if there's training that you have to learn to implement the brand standards, you have to show up for the training. You have to understand that you are following a system. There may be flexibility within the system, but even if you don't agree with every element of the brand standards, you're still expected to follow them. And that's why Julie said that if the operator is truly entrepreneurial and really thinks they have their own fantastic ideas for how to carry out the activity, maybe they're not the right type of person to be a franchisee.
Right.
And also their willingness to bring to bear their own peer pressure. If they see other operators doing things, delivering products or services in a way that's detrimental to the reputation of the social enterprise, that they are willing to weigh in and kind of police each other in terms of complying with the brand standards. So what we say to franchisors or social enterprises is that it's not hard to get respect from franchisees when you start out, because to some extent these programs are front loaded, right? You're delivering a lot of training at the front, or equipment or technology platform. It's all new, may be unknown to the operators when they start off, and it's impressive. But the harder part is to maintain that on an ongoing basis and continually add value to the program for the operators.
So I'm going to let you go to the next slide, Dave. I just want to make a programming note for everybody. We're going to go over just about 5 minutes, so please stick with us. Some more information coming up. So go ahead, Dave. Sorry.
Okay. Just to wrap up, I mean, when we're going through this exercise, whether it's in my private practice or with students, we're constructing the rules. The rules may be in the form of a contract or an agreement, or it doesn't have to be, but somewhere you have to have rules for the relationship between the social enterprise and the operator on the ground, the franchisee. And the idea of respect by design is you try, based on these considerations, you try to build the tools into the set of rules or the contract terms to capture these elements of mutual respect. So, for example, may create mechanisms within the rules that provide for input for franchisees on a regular basis, or that obligate franchisees to attend training on a regular basis. I know it's short on time, but so I won't belabor it, but it's really, the idea is that you are going to think ahead to the points that are important to adding value to the relationship on an ongoing basis, and try to reflect those in the contract or other rules that you're creating.
That's great. I think, while you're referring to franchisees and franchising in these points, I think these are maxims that are probably applicable to a lot of businesses, and really important things to keep in mind in terms of, keeping communications open and making sure that you're kind of respecting some of the basic core principles of what it is you're trying to do. Dave, thank you so much. I'm sorry to have you be at the end where we kind of crunched up all the time, but I really appreciate your input, and I think this is really important stuff for people to think about who are doing franchising or other types of social enterprise. I want to thank all 4 panelists. I have a couple of quick announcements, but I just want to say thanks to Julie and to Neil and to Emma and to Dave for being a part of this webinar, the first one of our series. And all 4 of them would be available. If you have additional questions, we'd be happy to put you in touch. I also wanted to mention that we do have the Social Sector Task Force of the International Franchise Association has come out with a really brilliant set of FAQs about social franchising, and we'll make that link available to you. I also want to let you know, you can actually advance the slide, Bianca, that we are launching our next round, the 2018 and 19 cohort of the Social Sector Franchise Accelerator. This is a project we've had for the last couple of years. It's an accelerator where social franchise experts, mentors, social franchise entrepreneurs, and we also provide kind of other services in a community of practice. And all of this is actually informs a research, project action research that we turn into case studies and make available for people to learn about. So you can go to the next slide, please. The application period ends on April 27th. We'll make the link available on the webinar page. It's also available on the Social Sector Franchise page. So please, if you're interested or can refer people who'd like to be part of it, here's our 5 teams right now for our current cohort. We really invite you to be a part of it. And finally, in our last minute or two here, I want to let you know that our next webinar will be on Wednesday, May 9th, 10:11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, US. And we're going to be looking at this social sector franchising state of the field in 2018 with 2 guests I'm really excited about having. Michael Seid, MSA Worldwide. Michael has been really kind of a leader in the social franchising field, making this bridge between the commercial and social spaces, particularly in his leadership around the social sector task force. And Peter Holt, who is one of our mentors. He's been involved the last couple of years and has been involved in assisting many social franchises over the years and has a really rich and valuable history. So both these gentlemen will be joining us. Should be a really interesting conversation. And so we welcome you to join us, and we will be sending notices out about that. Thank you for your attention. If you're able to hang out with us this extra 5 minutes, we really appreciate you doing that, and hope you'll be able to join us for future webinars. And keep in mind that these webinars are recorded, so you can visit the Social Sector Franchise Initiative website and find this and other webinars and podcasts, some webinars produced by the Social Sector Task Force and other resources. So I want to thank everybody again. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you a good morning, a good afternoon, or good evening wherever you are. Thank you.